Hello, Scottsdale, and welcome to Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale with Don and Kevin. Kevin, how are you?
Good afternoon, Mr. Henniger.
Doing pretty good, aren't you?
I'm doing great.
Summertime's coming around the corner, and we're still hanging in there, so all good. You know, Kevin, what happens when the person who helped shape modern Scottsdale tells the story from the inside?
I can't wait to hear it.
You know, we're going to find out right now. Our guest today is longtime city planner Don Hatter. Don spent nearly 4 decades guiding Scottsdale's growth, from the McDowell Sonoran Preserve to master plan development, growth policies, and the vision that helped define the city we know today. Part historian, part strategist, part institutional memory, Don brings a fascinating look at where Scottsdale has been and perhaps where it might be headed next. Don, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. We know before we dig into all of the stuff that you worked during your 38 years as a city planner, tell us a little bit more about your background. What happened before those 38 years started? Where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school? What's the Don Hatter background story?
Well, I moved to Scottsdale in 1958. I was just starting second grade. We moved up here from Yuma, and I was born in Albuquerque, so I'm Southwestern heritage, going actually at least 2 or 3 generations back. But yeah, I went to Soup High School, actually helped open Soup High School when it was Soup High School. Ended up at Coronado High School, and then 7 years at ASU. Have 2 degrees in geography, both a bachelor's and master's in geography, which is, I kind of fell into that kind of degree, but it fits me. I'm very much a spatial and visual kind of thinker, and planning and geography was like right up my alley. And I can still remember maps that I looked at when I was a kid. So the maps and visuals and aerial
Total
photos.
visuals, huh?
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
And how'd you end up with the city of Scottsdale?
It was kind of an interesting thing. There was an advertisement in the Scottsdale Progress for a planner position in March of 1976. I was finishing up my master's thesis. I was writing my thesis, saw this interview. I think my mother is the one who actually saw it in the paper, and she said, "Why don't you look into this?" I applied and ultimately got the job. I actually started working at the city before I got my degree.
Wow.
So yeah, it was an interesting process and jumped right in.
I like how he said he had 7 years at ASU and got like 3 or 4 degrees or something.
Yeah.
Usually kids go to ASU for 7 years and get 1 now, right?
Nowadays, if that.
I know a few of them. Yes.
Yeah, I had a couple buddies of mine that did the same thing in other schools as well. So Don, when you look back at your early days, how different was Scottsdale then from the city that we see today?
It was different in a number of different ways. One was that the city was only half the length north and south that it is now. I think it was Deer Valley Road was the northern boundary of the city, had been that boundary since the early 60s. And we thought that was Scottsdale. That would be all of Scottsdale. The city was a little less than half developed in that area at the time. 1976 was a recession year. In fact, I was very lucky to get a job. It was a federal job. It was the seat of jobs that were available back then. So I was lucky to get a job. But so we were coming out of a very lean times, OPEC oil crisis and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, I was the second one hired in planning after over half the planning staff had been fired about 1.5 years, 2 years before. So it had built up, the recession hit, kind of cleaned out the department, so I was one of the lucky ones who stepped into it. At the time, the city's planning group was working on the first master plan done entirely by staff. Previously, the master planning had been done with the help of consultants, the Eisner Plan in 1967 in particular. And this is the first time city staff was doing a plan in-house, which is why they needed additional staff. So I got involved in that, and I had to learn a lot of things real fast. For example, I ended up doing the transportation analysis for this Northeast area plan. That area is north of the reservation, east of Pima. It's basically south of the McDowells. And I had to learn how to do transportation traffic analysis. So I had to figure out how to allocate traffic to streets and do all that stuff, learn
you were the
traffic
guy.
rates.
Well,
So
it
it's,
was
that was like, so it was like being back in college again in the
Learning all over,
job.
right?
And then given my environmental background, that was the first plan where we started seriously talking about preserving the mountains and starting to preserve the desert and things like that.
That was 20 years before it actually happened, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, it's a year after I started, I was tagged with writing the city's hillside ordinance. And the theme at that point was find a way to protect the mountains without spending a dime. Because of the recessionary period, the income of the city was really lean. There was a lot of reticence in trying to go to the public for a bond issue or anything like that. In fact, the Indian Bend Wash had been approved finally by the city voters in 1973. That was after 2 or 3 elections where it had been turned down on the money issue. So the council was really not interested in going back to the citizens. Indian Bend Wash was still being developed and saying, well, we want to spend more money. So I came up with an ordinance that involved something we call density transfer, where the property owner would have the same number of units that they would have had otherwise, but they just build them off the mountain and they set the mountains aside. And it was a concept that was basically fair, basically good. In fact, from a profitability standpoint, it was probably actually better for the landowners because it would have cost them a lot of money to try to build up in the mountain. It was a lot cheaper to build higher density down at the base of the mountain. But the largest landowner, Kemper Marley, decided he didn't like that concept, so he sued. Ended up in the mid-'80s, we ended up losing that case. And ultimately, that whole process turned into what's now the environmentally sensitive lands ordinance. But it's interesting, at the Superior Court level, we actually won. So I learned a little bit about the court process and what it means to testify in court. I was 6 hours on the stand, so I got immersed in a lot of things real fast.
I got a medal for that, right? That's interesting. You know, in the past, and through a lot of your years, Scottsdale was praised for getting growth right. From your perspective, what did the city do differently than others? And then talk about the growth issue as it stands today. And for the past couple of years, what growth has become more than a 4-letter word, obviously, but it's a loaded word for sure. But what did the city do during the time and while you were there that really kind of got it right?
Well, there are several components to getting the growth thing right. One of them is there was a real focus on design. The planning staff I went into had several architects, landscape architects, people who had design sense. So there was an appreciation of the visual sense of what a community is and how to make it look good, which was important. There was also a very strong attitude of wanting to embody open space in the fabric of the community. In fact, I'm doing an audit of open space in Scottsdale now, and it looks like just under 50% of the city today is dedicated to some kind of open space or community use. So that was another component. Another component was the fact that we bought into the concept of integrated planning, where it's not just land use, it's not just transportation, it's just not water and sewer, that all of those things need to come together. And so we got very involved. Like I said, I was doing traffic analysis almost from the day one when I got started. But we got very involved in modeling water systems, sewer systems, transportation systems, and making sure that we also were able to have the infrastructure system to support the city that was going to come. So we didn't see the city plans as pieces. We try to think of it as an integrated whole, which is not how a lot of cities look at it. Very few cities at that point in time had the concept of modeling and trying to understand those things. And then we had a very active community. We had a lot of residents who, interestingly enough, learned a lot of planning terminology. You know, when I would go out to public meetings, it wasn't like I were trying to educate the citizens on planning stuff. Sometimes they were educating us on planning. And so we had a well-versed citizenry that understood a lot of planning things. We had a strong planning commission, strong city council in terms of understanding the techniques. In fact, a lot of the city council members had been on the planning commission, so they'd gotten their feet firmly on the ground in terms of what community development was all about. And then the overall concept that really came together was the city made it clear they wanted a quality community, that whatever Scottsdale was going to be, that we do it the best way we could, albeit with the least amount of cost. Mm-hmm. So it was it was really a challenge which then forced us to have a lot of creativity. And in many cases, a lot of things I worked on when I was assigned to do them, tried to look around and see what someone else is doing. And I found in many cases, almost nobody was doing what we were doing. So we had to try to figure it out ourselves every once in a while. We had to learn some lessons like, the legislature might say, well, we don't think that's right, folks. We'll change the laws on you kind of thing. But and there was a willingness to experiment, a willingness to take risks, a willingness to say, well, maybe it didn't work quite right. Can you tweak it? Or is it just not going to work kind of a thing? And there was a willingness to have that dialogue. And it was a very forward-thinking, let's make this the best place it can be kind of approach to things.
Kind of lost some of that now, haven't we, Kevin, with where we're at these days in terms of that kind of whole spirit. Let's try things and, it keeps some core values alive, but sometimes I wonder in all the rhetoric that we get, whether we've lost sight of what the real values are,
Exactly. Hey, Don, so you mentioned that even back then we had a very involved, residents were keenly involved and were pretty knowledgeable. Where do you think that comes from? Is it just because people just obviously cared about the community, but what do you think is responsible for that?
From an institutional standpoint, it really got started in the mid-1960s with a program called the Scottsdale Town Enrichment Program, which was started to support the city's first major bond issue in early 1965. And that grew into a very involved, very complex process that lasted almost a decade, with a couple things later on. But in that process, over 300 citizens had been involved. They looked at all kinds of ranges of different subjects. Scottsdale also was able to take advantage of one of the very earliest Arizona town halls on Scottsdale planning, I think in 1967. So there was a lot of interest, guided by the new mayor, Bud Timms, back in the day. But there was a lot of interest of getting the expertise of the community. There were a lot of people who had just moved to Scottsdale. Scottsdale really grew fast during that period of time. But it was a fairly well-educated community, with Motorola and ASU being the big employment drivers in the area. The average education in Scottsdale has been higher than most communities since 1960. So we had a well-educated community. They were encouraged to get involved. Those who were willing to take the time and so forth got involved. So it's kind of one of those things, once you get it started, it develops inertia. And so it became something that people wanted to do. They wanted to be part of it. And that tradition really held strong for a good 25, 30 years.
One of the problems, and Kevin, you and I have talked about this before, is the sense of apathy that a lot of people in Scottsdale, because it is such a great place to live. And so the people who show up for council meetings, the people who come as professed educated about community issues right now, have axes to grind. Whereas most of the city people enjoy living here. It always scores well in terms of people's satisfaction rates. So it sounds like the community back then was not anywhere near perhaps as apathetic as it is now. Does that follow?
Yeah. Well, there was clearly there were a lot of people in a city of, let's say, 75, 80,000 people. You had a core group of probably 1,200, 1,500 people who were really active. but they were connected with each other. There was an attitude of thinking forward. How do we make this place a better place? Part of the issue, I think, with Scottsdale these days is, as I'm going back and looking over aerial photos and so forth, there's not a lot of vacant land in Scottsdale. So we are, for the most part, what we're going to be. And there are places that you can tweak and change things a little bit, but there are so many layers of legal restrictions on the land these days, it can't change all that much. So where's the incentive? Where do people think they can make a difference in the future? And that question is harder to answer. It's harder to see. And that possibly discourages people to a degree. And through most of my career, it ended up being developers, and development was kind of the guy in black riding the black horse. He was the easy target to make as the enemy. Now, the attitude we had in the organization was the city's not going to build out the city. The city government doesn't do that. It's developers, so it has to be a partnership. So we were trying to see it as a partnership. But I can remember some very contentious hearings back in the late 70s and early 80s, and people saying some things that weren't real kind and so forth. But I'd say the one thing that was different is everybody was tending to look forward. They were looking, where are we going to be? How are we going to become? And as such, they were all looking in somewhat the same direction. I don't think that occurs now. Everybody's kind of looking at much more of a self-interest kind of approach to things. And I think that discourages an interest to get involved and try to make a difference.
So growth has always been a tough issue then, even back in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
Because we certainly think about that now. This is all we talk about sometimes.
Yeah, it seems like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so, but it's always been sort of a hot button.
It's always been going on. I can remember even about the time I started high school, there was a huge battle between Western architecture and modern architecture.
I bet.
And I mean, that dialogue was a major.
That's still going on today.
It's still going on today. Although Western, I'd say, doesn't have nearly the cachet and the strength that it had back then. And so it's funny, this huge battle goes back and forth, and then McCormick Ranch comes along with kind of the Spanish Mediterranean. Everybody said, oh, we'll go with that. And they dropped the argument over modern versus Western.
Yeah, right.
But, and Western's interesting in Scottsdale because it was actually kind of a made-up thing. Yeah. It was a drive that was started through the Chamber of Commerce about 1947, 46, 47, and really became the theme in Scottsdale in the 50s and early 60s. But if you drove into Scottsdale in 1940, you probably might have thought you were somewhere in Kansas, outside of the cacti.
Interesting, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about some of your historical. You're a history person as well. I think you serve on the Historical Society, or
yes.
Talk about your interest in history. I mean, you're obviously dropping a lot of historical facts on us here in the first few minutes of the show. This is really interesting to me.
Yeah, I backdoored into being a historian, and it was kind of weird. Within about 4 years of being an employee at Scottsdale, people started coming to me and asking me questions about Scottsdale a few years before, in part because I was one of the few people who had lived in Scottsdale as long as I'd had. Moving in 1958, I'd been in Scottsdale 20 years at that point in time, and even though I was a kid through much of that, I still had memories of what was going on, and so people started coming to me and asking questions. And also as a planner doing demographics and trying to understand how things can come together, I started doing a little research and asking. I was a pest around the staff asking questions. But I got backdoored into it because people kept coming to me asking questions, and in defense of trying to be able to come up with an answer, I had to learn more and more about it. I developed a real interest in history, joined the Historic Society Board in 1999, and ever since I've really gotten involved, I'm diving deep deep. My office is just filled with files.
In your retirement years,
In my retirement years.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I thought I knew a lot about Scottsdale history when I retired in 2014. And I probably know 2 or maybe 3 times as much about Scottsdale history now as what I did then. And I'm still uncovering things. I'm still finding things, sometimes through loose connections that you wouldn't have thought had any relationship to Scottsdale history. And then I find, oh, yeah, that explains something that happened. So I'm still in that process, learning about it. And I've learned recently that when I start talking about old Scottsdale history, how things got started, I'm going all the way back to the war with Mexico in 1848.
Is that right?
Because that set things in motion into the Civil War, which in turn set things in motion that ultimately led to Winfield Scott even feeling it was okay to come here. So in my approach to history is not so much a series of facts and time, but a series of connections. So I look at history as a series of strings tying things together. So when I see a broken link between something and I suspect something's there in history, part of what I do these days is try to find where there is a link there, right? There is a link there. So I'm trying to find those links and trying to make those connections, because at the time that we do our lives and do things, all those things are influencing our lives and influencing our decisions. So how can we reconstruct those concepts, those environments that were going on at the time? Because all of those things are helping people make decisions and coloring how they make their decisions at that time. So that's my approach to history, and it's fun. I really dig it.
You're still putting together pieces of the puzzle that you when you
Yes. Literally on a weekly basis, I will find something, pick up something, read something. They go, "Oh, wow, that explains it."
Really?
Yeah.
Do you know when Winfield Scott was born?
1837.
That's right.
There you go.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Nice try.
I knew he would know that,
Nice
but the
try.
only reason I asked is because I did a little video the day. I always get confused between, well, not always, but there was some confusion between General Winfield Scott and Chaplain Winfield Scott, Army, right?
Right.
And so I was doing a little research myself, and I did a little video on the differences between the two men, and I got the date wrong on when Winfield Scott was born. I thought he was only 14 years old when the Civil War started, and I ran into Joan Fadala that night. She goes, no, he was 24. I'm like, no, he was 14. And she goes, no, he wasn't. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm going to be arguing with Joan Fadala. And she was right. I had the date wrong. He was 24. And I had did this whole video about how the Civil War was gone and over by the time that he would enter the Army, which was completely wrong. Anyway, regardless to say, I'm not doing any more historical videos anymore.
Well, and you'll love this. When I started getting into the Winfield Scott story, there was a general, there's our chaplain. I found out there actually was a third Winfield Scott in Rhode Island at roughly the same period of time. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, it can get real
Well, he
interesting.
wasn't named after the general, probably, or maybe he might have been.
No, they were all named independently. And somehow, in a loose way, they're somehow related, but I didn't go down that path.
Anyway.
That's a piece you can get later on, right?
Yeah, maybe if I have some extra time.
All right, I had it
Well,
wrong.
that's good though.
I learned, though.
Well, Joan will set you right, and so will Don, as it turns out. So let's flash forward from historical perspectives to current times.
Okay.
When you think about the city's growth, what lessons do you think our current leadership should be paying attention to as they start making decisions about growth? And where do you see growth in this city over the next 5, 10, 20 years? What are some of the big issues that you're discovering now? Because you still pay attention to all this fun stuff that we all look at every week.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I'm a systems thinker, so I'm looking at what's going on today, trying to figure out and understand how the systems are working or where they're not working as well as they should. The first thing I would say is the way the United States economy is set up, it's set up on the basis of growth. If a community doesn't grow or doesn't have a fashion to grow or reinvent itself, it starts the process of dying. And the example I use is my wife was born in a small town in western Pennsylvania that was a pig iron company back down in the early 20s. The pig iron plant was closed in 1928 or 29, and basically the town she was born in is now the forest.
What was the name of the town?
Joseph,
Okay.
no, excuse me, it's Josephine,
Okay.
PA.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there wasn't anything to kind of keep things going,
Yeah.
keep things happening there. And if a community doesn't have something to encourage people to want to reinvest in the community, because we are now a community, as I said earlier, most everything that's going to exist in terms of development on land probably exists. So the big issue is how do you encourage any and all property owners to reinvest, whether it's their house or their business or whatever they've got going on. And that means there has to be a spirit of optimism that there's going to be something good or better occurring at some point in the future. There's some horizon for people to reach out to and get to. And finding ways to do that is really important in a community. Otherwise, if you're resting on what you have, things start falling apart.
Yep.
They, both in a real sense and then a figurative sense. People don't have the energy to take care of things. They stop paying attention to things, and things start falling apart. And connections amongst people within the community don't work as well, and so forth. So that's kind of the big lesson that I had as a planner going forward is how do I think of things 30, 40, 50 years ahead, which is really hard to do, and do it in a way that it establishes a basis that then you have a solid foundation for that to be rehabbed and rebuilt and taken forward at some future point. And in terms of where this community is at, Scottsdale is going to need to find ways very soon to start to reinvent itself, to start understanding how economically the community works, because the economics of the future are not going to be the same economics of the past. We were able to leverage a lot of growth, a lot of building permits, a lot of growth activities, sales tax through growth, and take advantage of that and use it to build investment and reduce costs for the people who lived here. We were also able, because we had a lot of retail and other things happening that wasn't happening in the rest of the valley, we were able to draw money from other communities, not just winter visitors, but we literally drew sales tax from across the valley into Scottsdale. So a lot of what we used and leveraged was technically someone else's money, and we were able to be smart about it. So how can a community that can't rely so much on this outside money, we still have visitors, and they're a big part of our community, but they're not as big a segment in the scheme of things as they were. We don't have growth money, building permit money, and sales tax money related to growth necessarily to use in the future. So we've got to find other ways to fund and take care of things to encourage growth that becomes an asset to the community as a whole. And I think it means kind of rethinking things, getting back to understanding how and what's working now, what's not going to work tomorrow, and what are the opportunities of tomorrow, which is a step back and rethinking kind of process that I think is going to be critical. Otherwise, you just kind of fall into things and things happen, and that's not a way for a community to move forward. My mother grew up in Pasadena, California, and I've always seen Scottsdale as kind of being like Pasadena. Pasadena is northeast of downtown LA, and a little bit over the hill. It was the artsy community, the upper end community near the mountains and all that kind of stuff. And when you look at the path of Pasadena, it went through some kind of not so good times in the late 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and yet Pasadena today has again become a desirable place. People are reinvesting there, and the community has found its new version of itself, and it's still strong. And I think Scottsdale needs to start thinking those kinds of ways. Because if you sit there and just say, look how great we are, greatness goes away because the other part is that everybody out there is trying to copy what Scottsdale did.
Right.
Right.
And so a lot of the other communities now have something newer. I look at it and say, well, they didn't do the foundational behind the scenes, make sure it's built right kind of stuff. So it's going to fade quicker than the stuff we have here. But it's flashier, it's newer and so forth. So we don't have the same level of distinction as a community visually and in some other aspects. So we've got to rethink, what does it mean to be Scottsdale? Where do we leap ahead? And where do we head to? How can we rally the community around a vision or a future that that's exciting, that will help make this a better place to live?
I think we got a theme here, Kevin, that we need to start promoting with some of our city leaders these days.
Well, we do, but it's nothing new.
No.
Right? I mean, Don illustrates the point of it, but we've been talking about how we can't just sit back and think that we're a great city, and we got to keep giving ourselves. Which leads to a question, Don, I do want to ask you. Think of, as a city planner and somebody who has this historical perspective, are there any communities around that you see are going through a sort of change or think are doing it right? Are there any examples you can think of?
Oh, boy. I see a lot of copycat communities around.
Yeah.
I would say, not in the school district sense, but at least the community sense, some of what Peoria is doing is interesting. They're really becoming the Scottsdale of the West Valley or Northwest Valley. This valley is really turning into 5 regions: Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Southwest, and Center. But I'd say Peoria is getting some things right. Not everything by any means. There's some things that, I go over there and go, oops. But
you got a lot.
But part of the problem I'd see these days is that kind of vision, that kind of thinking of a community means willingness to take risk. Mm-hmm. And I see so little of that. I'm not sure I see any community that's really willing to take risks, to step out, to step forward, and to try to develop a community ethic that is thinking forward and thinking of a vision of the future. And things are going by so fast. This AI stuff, the social media stuff, all the twists and turns economically that are going on. People are just, I think, in awe or don't feel like they've got a handle on things. So there need to be some folks that are able to get a handle on that, to get a sense, kind of cut through all the mushy busyness that goes on and say, okay, this is where we can see a path through this, using these things, building on the foundations that we've developed in the past, and building a community that says this is what we want to be.
Good thoughts, Don. Lessons to be learned, Kevin.
Absolutely.
For sure. Don, thank you so much for being with us today. Your perspective, I think, is a reminder that great cities don't happen by accident. Mm-mm. They're shaped by people willing to think decades ahead, and you certainly have done that in your career with the city, and we appreciate that, and for all the lasting mark you left on our community and all the work you keep doing. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you all for listening. Tune in for our next episode of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale.